Now, getting back to what can people do about it, some folks on the subreddit Wall Street Bets decided there was something they could do about it.
Robert gets the segues. I missed that one. That was a wide open home run. Good segue. What can people do?
It was fantastical. So some of the background for all of what happened with GameStop is to understand two other things: what happened in 2008, and what the real nature of Wall Street and short selling as a subconstituent component of that is. In particular, one of the people that was caught up in this was a man by the name of Stephen Cohen. He's the show Billions hedge fund guy, is inspired by the real life of Stephen Cohen. Some years ago, I helped screw him out of being able to buy the Dodgers just for the fun of it, just for the spite of it. Because I hate the guy. But to go back first, I think for 2008, because one of my favorite phrases is never forgive, never forget, and in this context, hold the line. So in the context of what happened here is that a subreddit formed and identified, and they were sort of dissident day trader types. And then a lot of them were informed by what happened in 2008. A lot of them were sharing their stories in this context. And they're heartbreaking, heart-rendering stories. And for people who don't know, because conservatives were fed a big myth about what happened in 2008, the way a lot of people, like one guy just described it, the reason why he has never forgot and never forgiven is because he sees it in his everyday life today. He sees his father, who is a highly successful businessman, get so wrecked by what happened thanks to Wall Street and the big banks in 2008 that he's now a shell of himself and a daily alcoholic. He sees it in his brother. They all have life stories like this. Steve Bannon has a story like this. Part of what radicalized him was what happened in 2008, and there was never a real reconciliation of what took place there because the big boys got to walk. The big boys got bailed out, while little people lost their homes, their businesses, and their livelihoods. And one of the myths that built up about this, and it fits two different myths, because one of the myths is your Benji Shapiro myth about how Wall Street works. And just like the myth about how our government works, how the FBI works, how the CIA works, how Congress works, that have been unmasked during the Trump era in large part. Some of these were unmasked before. And the myth of Wall Street, as Benji Shapiro would put it, was Wall Street gets together and they just try to allocate capital to make sure it's the most efficient and productive. And by the way, my wife is a doctor. That has never been the case.
You're going to get hate for being mean to Ben Shapiro. But
he deserves it. The reason why I attack some of these people personally is they're not trustworthy sources. They don't give intelligent information. They don't give intelligent insight. They frequently give disinformation and misinformation. And just because he's on the conservative side of the culture wars and can take down some wokester nitwit kid in college doesn't make him a reliable, trustworthy source beyond that. And so he was actually pushing this during the middle of the GameStop stuff. That has never been the case with Wall Street. Wall Street is about greedy thieves looking for ways to steal from you and me. There have always been, as will be applicable particularly here, reverse Robin Hoods. They want to steal from the poor, get rich by stealing from the poor. And one of the ways so what happened during like the 2008 housing crash, the mythology was that the bank regulators came in and forced these poor banks to lend money that they didn't want to do, but they had to. And that's why the system failed. Well, there's two problems with it. One, I lived through it. As a young lawyer in 2001 and 2002, I was already suing banks all across the country for the subprime lending problem before anyone knew it was a big problem. And we couldn't get any attention from me and the guy who founded the public interest law firm, couldn't get any interest from either side of the political aisle because they were being enriched by their donations from the big banks, but also because it gave the illusion of prosperity to ordinary people. It's not a coincidence that we had the housing bubble at the same time China entered the WTO. So while people are actually getting stripped of their real equity in the economy, they're given the illusion that the things are great because of the housing bubble. It effectively distracted what was really happening in their economic lives. So it served a big political interest. That's number one. Number two, anytime you hear somebody tell you that the banks were forced by the mean regulators into doing something they didn't want to do, red flag should sprout up right away. There's no such thing. If a regulation came in, it's because the banks wanted that regulation. In this particular context, one of their potential restrictions on what they were doing, not only that, you should ask yourself, did the Clinton administration that helped deregulate banks and the Bush administration that was always in the pocket of banks really have mean regulations on the banks? Think that through. That never made any sense. But the banks did a good job of feeding that nonsense story to a lot of your conservative types, who many of them still believe it. Had nothing to do with it because I witnessed what happened. What happened was banks created a bubble to get rich off of ordinary people, and then when it crashed, they blamed ordinary people and pocketed the cash and got bailed out. And there's a lot of people still enraged about what happened because they never forget, never forgive, and when the time comes, hold the line. So what happened is some folks on the subreddit figured out the problem of short selling and how to financially aggregate their collective power to punish the short sellers. So what really happens in short selling, there's a great podcast by Eric Hunley, Unstructured podcast that he did yesterday with two people that are in this trade who will give you a very good background description of what took place. I am not a Wall Street approved financial advisor. Indeed, I'm not approved by Wall Street for much of anything. And I prefer to stay that way. And I hate banks. I'll sue banks just to sue banks. They're greedy people that just steal and rob. They don't make money. They're parasites. They're rarely productive. Apologies to any bankers in the audience. There's a few exceptions, I'm sure.
You're getting a surprising amount of love in the comment section for your impersonation of
people who've experienced that they understand it. I'm the lawyer I am because of how the system treated my father, and I am one of those people that will never forgive and never forget because the system decided to crush a little guy because they could, and they say the sins of the father are visited upon the son. Old scriptural reference. I like the opposite of that. The sins against the father are long remembered by the son. And there's a lot of people who are in that boat. The way Wall Street really operates is they look for opportunities to rob and steal. So in the 80s, when a guy like Stephen Cohen was an up-and-coming trader, the character from Billions is based upon or inspired by the inside information was the name of the game. And often what you did was you went into a business like the movie Wall Street portrays, our second cinematic reference, where your real game, like you have Charlie Sheen, who's this nice, naive character who believes in the system only to discover the system isn't what it says it is. The system isn't about what they claim it to be about. The mask is just a mask and the emperor is truly naked. And the way short selling works is not about a fair allocation of capital. Not because they often believe a business is worth less than it is. And GameStop was one of the classic examples of this. So frequently what they do is they target small cap, medium cap businesses that can't defend themselves. They come in and they buy a big short. And the way they do that is always interesting. I mean, theoretically, they're borrowing the stock. They sell the borrowed stock, and then they have to buy it back within a certain time frame to give it back to the person they borrowed from. Sometimes it appears that isn't always what's happening. Sometimes it appears that they're naked selling. They're selling a stock that they haven't even borrowed in the first place. That's quasi illegal, but there's a whole bunch of exemptions and exceptions if you dig in. But basically what they do is they want to destroy a business. And the way they can destroy that business is by shorting the stock in enough volume and then using their allies in the SEC, using their allies in government, using their allies in the press, in the financial press particularly, to often help destroy a business that's actually a good business. And like here in GameStop, you had a brick and mortar business that a lot of these kids, a lot of these young day traders grew up as gamers. So they grew up like my son did. He loved GameStop. I remember in LA, when the first place he wanted to go, I thought, it's always a great place you could go. Where do you want to go? It's like, you got to take me to GameStop. And I was like, okay, I had never heard of GameStop. I mean, that was like the ultimate thing. Take him to GameStop. If you'd taken the little one to GameStop, maybe you'd remember that instead of saying, I don't remember Daddy taking me anywhere, Mommy. He kept me in the house all day after a day tours and travels of the little one. But so they have a love affair in part with GameStop. They have good memories of GameStop. Well, Michael Burry, of The Big Short, who he did a short, but he was shorting the big banks. He wasn't shorting some small little guy. Early on identified that GameStop was a good stock and it didn't make sense the level to which it was going down. I mean, there was a point where it had more cash on hand than it was purportedly worth, which just didn't make sense. And so he decided to start buying it. People on the subreddit started pointing out there's a lot of good stocks that the only reason they're low valued is because these big hedge funds are trying to destroy them because they bought a big short position. And to make that short position come true, they need to destroy the business. And so these guys got together and said, well, what happens if we create our own fund equal to or even bigger than some of these hedge funds? So you take, like, let's say you have 6 million or so, 5 million or so on the Wall Street Bets subreddit, which has a great little meme guy on the front of it. And they have average, say, $5,000 that they can trade with. Well, you start aggregating the math, and they're bigger if they use their collective power than even some of the biggest hedge funds are, than even Cohen's hedge fund is. And so they figured out, hey, you know what? One, GameStop is a good stock. It's probably worth 10 to 20 times more than what's currently being traded for. Second, these guys have huge shorts. They had shorted more than the available stock. So that was up to 140% of the stock had been shorted. That's what now did.
No, yeah, that's the thing. So that's a disputed fact that I'm having with people that I discuss this with. Some people are saying no, it was only 140% shorted after they tried to cover their shorts, which I didn't really understand that rationale. But I don't even understand, how do you short more of a stock than exists?
That's a good question. I've heard a lot of people explain it and say that, some people said, look, it's just the way the transaction is done that can happen without naked short selling occurring. There's other people that strongly suspect naked short selling. This was a big concern of Patrick Byrne back when he was at Overstock. And people like Elon Musk have been the victim of it. Patrick Byrne used to point out that that you could find institutionally a large, like what happened if people found out there's a bunch of stock that's been sold that the person didn't even ever own. You didn't even borrow it to own it. Think what that impact would be on the stock market. So that's why there are these collateral issues that could be implicated by what the hedge funds are doing. And so, particularly because they make so much money shorting stock, mostly by destroying good businesses frequently. That's often what they're doing. So Elon Musk has been the repeated victim of short sellers. So he hates them with an unbridled passion. And so what happens, these guys get together and they're like, let's exercise our collective power. And it wasn't because they thought GameStop was necessarily worth $400. It was, you know what? We can wage war on the shorts and keep forcing them to buy at higher and higher rates. We can finally redistribute wealth from these Wall Street thieves who've been robbing from poor and working people for decades. And we can rob from them and make them give it right back to us because we can continue to short their short position by buying and holding the line. And so, as long as we bring our numbers, we show what populism look like in a real free enterprise system. This is what it looks like. The best populist revolt against Wall Street functionally, maybe in its history. And all of a sudden, and what these arrogant, greedy hedge funds did, they even put out sarcastic comments about the Redditors, was often they doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down. They kept buying more shorts. And the market and the stock just kept going up, because these guys joined together, because for many of them, it was just a moral principle. It was like, I don't care if I lose my 5-10 grand in the market. These SOBs are finally going to pay. They're finally going to hear me rage. They're going to get some sense of payback for what they've been doing and what they did. And the fact, when I found Stephen Cohen was connected to some of this, that Melvin Capital, one of the companies that had a big short position, is connected to Stephen Cohen, that he was trying to help bail them out. Stephen Cohen, his connected people were part of the biggest insider trading scandal in known public history. And yet he managed to never serve a day in prison because Preet Bharara is a coward at heart. So I was even more thrilled. And if people want to see what a genius Stephen Cohen is, he tried to go at Dave Portnoy. I think it's Portnoy, who does Barstool Sports, who went after all these guys. And Stephen Cohen was so agitated that anybody would dare challenge him, one of the most corrupt actors on Wall Street and forever. Makes Gordon Gekko look like a high beacon of ethics. He couldn't even, he went after Portnoy, and Portnoy just kept coming back right at him, saying, no, you belong in prison, pal. You belong in jail, pal. And it was so effective to Stephen Cohen, then he went off of Twitter. And this guy's supposed to be such a genius. That's how he made all those profits all these years, as Benji Shapiro would say, because of merit? I don't think so. He's a crook. He belongs in prison for life. But he got to walk because of how corrupt our system is. So at the peak of this, first you had a bunch of politicians calling for investigation of the Redditors. calling for the SEC to look into them, including that fake, that phony, that fraud.
Elizabeth
Pocahontas, Senator from Elizabeth Warren, who always wanted to take on Wall Street. First thing she does, attack the Redditors on behalf of Wall Street.
And not just that, she comes in purporting that she's acting for the employees of GameStop, as if any of this has any direct impact on the employees of GameStop. But this
saved the employees. If the shorts had their way, those employees would have all lost jobs, and the business would be gone and dead. And they would have and the hedge funds would have feasted on the carcass. That's what they do. That's who they are. But she had to pretend to be doing that, because how do you keep the mask that you're really a critic of Wall Street when you're coming to bail them out at the greatest populist revolt against Wall Street in its history with real functional financial capital? People figured out if they put all their money together, you take all the day traders out there, they can be bigger than every single hedge fund. And if they collectively target their resources, they can defeat the hedge funds in critical areas of economic life.
And so everybody appreciates this. These are things that people who pay attention to know. There's a way of finding out. I mean, it's public information what percentage or what amount of a stock is currently being shorted. And so when you talk about this thing called the short squeeze, which is they had a short squeeze on steroids, is people are buying up the stock, which is driving the price up, which means that everybody who sold it and now has to buy it back to give back to the lender is basically seeing that they have to buy it back for more than they sold it for. And so they start buying it up in order to minimize their losses. But in so buying it up, it actually increase the price and exacerbate their own losses. And that's what you saw with GameStop, because people knew that there was an outrageous amount of shorts on that stock and they decided to exploit it. But here's the question. Sticking it to the hedge funds is fine. And you had that one hedge fund, I don't know what the name was, lost $5 billion. Some of these hedge funds maybe lost 70% of their value. This is the argument that I'm trying to understand. Are you sticking it to the hedge funds by eviscerating the hedge funds, or are you just punishing the investors on behalf of whom those hedge funds were investing money? Because so the hedge fund's going to lose its assets, but its assets are monies that it's in theory managing for individual investors. Am I wrong on that, or am I misunderstanding that?
No, but the hedge funds don't manage 401ks. Hedge funds manage money for other millionaires and billionaires predominantly. So I have no sympathy. And the hedge funds have been a nefarious institution, in my view, in Wall Street for a long time, along with all these big boys who don't take a productive focus on helping the ordinary person in the economy. They've been one of the greatest threats and damage to the economy and our politics. And what's really happening is, and to the extent that some of those hedge fund people are losing money, it's people on the high end of the scale losing money to people on the low and medium end of the scale. Now, some other people entered into this. Elon Musk, some other people were joining in. They were saying, get shorty, and that kind of stuff. So they helped facilitate it and promote it. But the main effect was to protect a small business from being destroyed by the shorts. The second part was getting revenge on these big hedge funds that steal and rob as a routine basis. And the third was redistribution of power and influence and money from people with a lot more of it to people with a lot less of it, which enters into the second stage. So while these real live subredditors of Wall Street bets were playing Robinhood for real for the first time since Robinhood, one of their means and tools was an app called Robinhood. Now, this app purportedly was about helping the ordinary person get access to Wall Street.
Let the people vote. Let the people vote. Let the people trade was their motto.
Exactly. And that was their marketing pitch. Now, the reality behind Robinhood was twofold. One, they were actually trading. They were using the information, like as you mentioned in the film Social Dilemma. If you're not paying anything for the product, you are the product, and you're paying that way. And so what the big funds were using the information from this aggregate collective of Robinhood, and that was the real client of Robinhood. The customer was purportedly the client, but they weren't. The real client was the people using that information, often hedge funds, to front run, in some cases, their bets, and using that information, a kind of inside information, but not denominated so legally, to run ahead of the curve and monetize. Well, now the second part was the Wall Street had been using apps like Robinhood to get people to inflate the value of the stock market by using their stimulus checks and their lockdown lives to become day traders. And the thought process was, we can get all of this cash that theoretically the government's giving to ordinary people to really come back to us, Wall Street. Not satisfied with the government put, not satisfied with the Fed put. they needed a stimmy put to on top of it. And so they never thought it could be used against them. They didn't recognize what happens when you give the peasants too many pitchforks. You think they're harvesting for you. Maybe they're going to use it against you.
And just so everybody appreciates this, and if anybody hasn't seen it, watch Eric Hunley's live stream yesterday with two experts. I forget their names. They talk
spelled W-A-N-G, but pronunciated W-A-N-G. Andy and I think Chris.
And it's amazing. It's fascinating. I say their only curse is that they're two experts to be able to simplify it enough. But the one thing about, they were saying all of these free trading apps, it's a known thing in the industry. Yeah, they're selling your data to hedge funds and to other investment entities so they can, get a feel for the market and, see what the tastes are and what people are doing. But it's one, and I was listening in the car and I was on data, so I couldn't get involved. It's one level more nefarious than that people don't really appreciate. It is transmitting the data, actually, from what I understand and from what I've read. It was transmitting this data, selling this data to hedge funds before the trade would go through. And so these hedge funds are getting, not just in real time, but ahead of your actual action, data that allows them to, in turn, make decisions almost before the person playing has a chance to have their order go through. So their order is not just being collected for data and sold. It's being sold in a manner that's going to negatively affect them or potentially negatively affect them, which is
it was the tool by which they were taking them on. And so they just never thought this tool could be used against them. And so what do? Robinhood suddenly shuts down the app. You can sell, but you can't buy. And at a perfect key time to drop the stock enough so that these big shorts, these big hedge funds could get out of their tough short position. Still lose a lot of money, but lose nowhere near what they were doing because Musk and the rest were trying to drive this up to 1,000. They were going to start wiping out hedge fund after hedge fund after hedge fund. These, particularly the greediest, most pernicious, nastiest ones. Because be frank, a good, honest hedge fund wouldn't be massively shorting GameStop. Any hedge fund that's shorting is a hedge fund that needs to be cleaned out, and a true free market would be with these aggregate actors. So they couldn't allow the free market to do. So we got to see how big tech doesn't plan on just controlling speech, doesn't just plan on manipulating elections, doesn't just plan on culturally compelling certain thoughts. It's now being used to prevent you from being able to even trade using an app called Robinhood, whose marketing pitch was free the people to trade. So it shows the scale and scope of the corruption. Now, they got such blowback that they didn't anticipate. You had Portnoy going around everywhere saying these people belong in prison, those people belong in prison. They didn't expect a scale of it, such that, Tucker Carlson is putting it on there. Other people, you saw a populist alignment across the left and the right. Now, if you're as dumb and as fraudulent as AOC, you blow that up single-handedly. But, putting her aside, in the real populist left and right, there was a huge alignment from the Jimmy Dores to the Alex Joneses. They were all gung-ho on let's wage war on Wall Street. The old using our little apps and our little bit of cash to do so. And so they end up coming back on it. But of course, the question was, how could Robinhood do this, given they promised people contractually and in their marketing that the whole point was to let people trade? And that led to a class action suit against them.
Now, I should present the position from what was explained by people who are smarter than me on this subject. Robinhood's explanation might have been very lacking. It might have been disingenuous. It might have been a total lie. Apparently, some people are hypothesizing that Robinhood's motivation was actually that they were being blocked. What was it? What was the issue? That when you facilitate these trades, because there's a 2-day clearing period or 1 to 2 day clearing period, sometimes the trading app or I forget who it is required to put up a percentage of the sale between 1% and 3%. And because the volume was so high on GameStop, Robinhood couldn't put up couldn't front the advance that they would have to front on these trades, which is why they were compelled to stop trading on the stock. Now,
that explanation. I've heard some other ones that the SEC forced them to do so. There's some suspicions on that accord, because our new Treasury Secretary took a lot of money for speeches to Wall Street over the last several years, including, I think it's over $800,000 from one of the big hedge funds that was neck deep in problems related to GameStop. And so when the press secretary was asked about this, the press secretary said, don't worry, she's a woman. Treasury Secretary's a woman. So
Yes.
now all of a sudden,
Right.
you get to see what identity politics is really about. It's about it's a convenient mask to allow the same game of corruption and fraud to occur, but say magically it can't occur because of their race, gender identity, or gender. The problem for the Biden administration is everybody left and right can see it in live time. And they're like, that's not an explanation. Not only that, apparently she signed an ethics agreement that she wouldn't be involved in anything concerning anybody she'd received fat checks from in the last year, but apparently has refused to exercise that obligation. So it is possible. And then, of course, the head of the SEC, currently for director of compliance, is none less than Peter Strzok's wife. So you still have that, with the infamous Peter Strzok of Spygate, Russiagate, corruption, and collusion. So that's possible. But a lot of people, both Zero Hedge, the Wall Street Bets guy, Portney, and other people were deeply skeptical because of the timing of this. And Zero Hedge, for people who don't know, they know it from its sort of dissident outsider politics. It started as a lot of dissident Wall Street guys from in the mid-2000s, 04, 05, 06. Nobody still knows who they are. But they're very knowledgeable in this field, and they were just pointing out fact after fact that said Robinhood's story doesn't make sense. Now, the official legal excuse, all the law professors quickly stepped in to explain you can't sue Robinhood. Of course not, because all these guys are in the bag for these boys. And they said the reason you can't is because there's an exculpatory clause in Robinhood's contract that says they can stop you from trading at any time for any reason. The problem with that is unless you have a judge as corrupt as the judge in the Amazon case in the Western District of Washington, that makes the whole rest of the contract and all of their marketing inconsequential. So if that was the whole contract, okay, but it's not the whole contract.
Well, no, and not just that. It's let me just take this chat off. It's not just a question of stopping the trading. It was a question of only allowing the sales, which is effectively, I want to call it market manipulation for lack of a better word. But that's forcing the shorting of the stock because all people can do is sell. It for anybody who doesn't know, it triggers people's stop losses, people who've set automatic sell orders, and it creates a tank, which it in fact did. It created such a tank. I think it went down like 50% from whatever 100 to 130 and then back up. But you imagine what that difference in the tank allowed the hedge funds to buy back or to get out of their short positions at. The differential was exponential.
Especially got to see collusion in live time. Because, I mean, this is how the reason why I connected the short selling to Wall Street is because it's just a different version of insider trading, capitalizing on relationships in illicit ways with the media and the government to actually get rich at the expense of ordinary people, not to have maximum productivity, whatever nonsense Benji Shapiro's talking about. That's the way it really works. It always reminds me of another great movie, Back to School. And Ben Shapiro's position reminds me of Dean Thornton, who's saying, Rodney Dangerfield's going back to school. He's actually been a real businessman in the movie. That's his character. And Dean Thornton says, we're going to build projects. We're going to make widgets. And here's a whole business plan. He lays out all this business plan. And Rodney Shapiro's pointing out, Roger Dangerfield is pointing out, Rodney Dangerfield, Lord have mercy. Rodney Dangerfield's pointing out, one, he goes, you need to bribe these people. You need to take care of those people. You need to worry about the unions. You need to worry about who actually controls some of those unions, so on and so forth. And Dean Thornton says, oh, that's not who we are. Well, we're an ethical business and so forth. And and he wanted to believe in the mythical, fictional version of Wall Street that economics professors teach students all across the country every day, the mythology of it that's meant to excuse its wealth making, which is mostly just thieving and stealing. And so at a later point, the professor says, well, where should we place this factory of ours to start the business? And Rodney Dangerfield says, how about Disneyland? Because it's as much of a fantasy as that place is. And so that's the Benji Shapiro version of these events. What's happening is tons of people are seeing in live time the whole system unmasked because the insider collusion that allows for insider trading also is the insider collusion that allows for the short selling to be profitable. And the businesses have to be complicit in the process. Just research how Stephen Cohen got to walk despite massive evidence of massive corruption. I detailed that to people that helped prevent him from buying the LA Dodgers years ago. And now he owns the New York Mets. I don't care about the Mets, so that's their problem. But seeing him taken down a few notches is just, it's worthy of a cigar. I might have to light it one of these days. So the net effect is people get to see in live time, either Robinhood's doing this at the behest and the behalf of the government, or they're doing it at the behest and the behalf of their real clients or customers, because their real explanation isn't holding water. And that led to the class action that I think will get past the dismissal stage, because there's facts and I think there's going to be a lot more class actions. I've been recommending to people bring class actions within each state under each state's laws, so you diversify the courts you have access to. Don't depend on just the Southern District of New York or federal court. There's a lot of places you can sue, as far as I can tell, because in my view, the biggest lie here wasn't the contractual breach. It was the marketing lie. They got a lot of people to buy Robinhood by promising them they could trade, and then suddenly and summarily revoke that when it served their real interest in collusion and market manipulation on Wall Street.
And I mean, that is my question. And now that we've appreciated these incestuous ties between the SEC and the powers that be, as far as I'm concerned, the overt market manipulation is not a bunch of people on Reddit, and we're talking legit freedom of speech, protected speech, saying, go buy this stock, here's why, here are the metrics, and do it. It's Robinhood saying sell only now for everyone who has this stock, tanking the price deliberately, because now we know behind the back scenes, they are beholden not to the people, who they're giving a free app to, but to the people buying that data, who are now saying, kill it literally because we're dying here. And they do it. Now, the chances of some sort of SEC investigation into Robinhood, I mean, from what I'm reading on you, Robert, slim to none.
They may try to, because that's their usual protocol. What helps the insider traders and the short sellers is the complicity of the SEC. That's why I recommend people watch the show Billions. Like, some people are, don't watch it to get attached to characters or anything else. Watch it because it's an expose of how Wall Street really works and how the so-called criminal prosecutors really work. Where the rotating door at the SEC, where do those people end up after they work at the SEC? Where do some of their friends and family end up working at the SEC? They protect the big boys to come after the little people. But can they realistically come after 10 million Americans? Good luck with that. So that's why it's not going to go anywhere. Plus, or it's not likely to go anywhere. They would like it to, but the blowback politically, it's another example where they just weren't ready. They don't understand the country. They don't understand there's never been a resolution of what happened in 2008. The real culprits were never held responsible, were never held liable because of the complicity and corruption, particularly of prosecutors in New York, but also elsewhere in that part of the process. And that's why, again, credit to the Texas Attorney General, steps into as the only real populist advocate out there consistently. He's demanding all the information about all of these colluding operators on Wall Street in protection of the people on the subreddit. So they thought they could crush the subreddit. Instead, they held the line. And instead, it's a lot of big billionaires and hedge funds that are going to take the hit. And I think politically, ultimately, the blowback's going to go in that direction, because the ordinary person is seeing it. The ordinary politician is seeing it. And they're realizing, we really can't go where we thought we could go. We can't play the rules, play the game we're used to playing. Because a lot of these senators, for example, Millionaires Club, have insider dealing that goes on a routine basis. And they realize that, at some point when the peasants have more pitchforks, there's not much they can do other than be on the peasant side at some level. So I think it's an extraordinary, one of the most incredible things to ever witness. It shows the power of the people to come up with solutions, despite problems that seem incurable, despite problems that seem insurmountable. Just a few kids on subreddit showed that you can, in fact, change the world.
And now, before I ask this next question, it is my time to do the weekly reminder. We're at 13,776 people, and I think 3,600 thumbs up. Let's break the system one more time. Thumbs up, and everyone put in a comedic joke in the chat and see what happens when 13,000 people flood YouTube with a chat. But not before I get to the super chat.
That's what all this was about. It was about the power of the people combined. This was one of the most great populist revolutionary acts I've ever witnessed. It aligned the populist left and the right, the authentic ones, within minutes, while exposing all the frauds and the fakes and the phonies within seconds. How many congressmen said nothing? How many senators said nothing? How much of the Biden administration had to hide? How much did the press? What was the press's attack? These must be alt-right neo-Nazis who are getting together, connected to Trump somehow. I mean, the ludicrous lies. They have their old script and they just change a few names and they think that works, not realizing they're exposing themselves to a whole new audience who's like, oh, you guys have been lying all along. Newsweek, you're frauds. Axios, you're frauds. All of you are frauds. It was beautiful to witness.
This came up early in the pandemic when we found out that a few politicians were selling their stocks in advance of publicly disclosing the upcoming doom. I've heard people say, and I think we mentioned it a couple times, insider trading is not illegal for politicians.
That's right. Not if you're in Washington.
Well, formally not illegal, or there's just no such thing as insider trading. Like, are they
formally not illegal? So, now there's the good explanation for it was, here's my view. My view is you get elected to Congress, you can't trade in the stock market, period. Because their practicality was we get so much information. If anything, we get information as a House or Senate member is now called inside information. It will be difficult for us to ever trade without being easily accused. And my answer was, I recognize that problem. Solution, if you decide to get elected to the House or Senate, you give up the right to own any stocks. How does you put them in a truly blind trust? Not one of those Venetian blind trusts that you can take a peek whenever you need to, but a truly blind trust if you're going to go that route. That's what, but yes, it's routine. It's open. As another example of hypocrisy, when Richard Burr was caught doing so, they just shut down that whole investigation this week too. If you have power and privilege in Washington, you get to walk free if you're on the right side of the political aisle.
Okay, but now because I still don't think I understand. It is not formally. The idea is that it's not formally legal. It's still technically illegal. Just that nobody ever.
No, it's all legal. It's all legal. If the basis of your inside information is what you learned in Congress, it could still be a crime if you get inside information outside of your congressional duties. But if the theory was, it's unfair to do that to Congress members because of how it could complicate their ability to do their jobs as Congress members. Well, it was licensing bribery so that they serve the interest of Wall Street.
It would seem to me that would be the sacrifice that people would make when they want to get a guaranteed $170 or whatever $1,000 a year plus benefits plus everything. Because if a lawyer, in the context of his or her employment, learns some information about a client's business, even though it's in the same context of doing business, they'll get disbarred and they will get imprisoned for trading on that information.
Unless they're on the right political side, because I've dealt with some lawyers on the opposite side that have done precisely that. So if you're right politics, it's immunity.
Because I'm literally flabbergasted. I always thought it was sort of a tongue in cheek. Yeah, they're immune because nobody prosecutes. I didn't realize that there was a discussion had, and they decided
it used to be illegal. Now it's not.
Well, I want to puke.
Well, this might be a good bridge. It transitions into my Supreme Court cert petition being filed tomorrow on behalf of the Covington boys